What is it about Christianity that keeps you involved?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Well, Kris, thank you so much for joining me for Growing Up Fundie. First of all, how are you doing?
I am super
That
duper.
sounds very convincing. I'm very convinced by how super you're doing.
I've had a long day at work, but I'm glad that I'm home.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we were just talking about this before we were on the record. We became acquainted in college, at least when I was in college. Were you still in college at that point?
Yeah, I think I still was. Yeah.
Yeah, very cool. And we just discovered today that I don't think we've ever actually talked. I think it's always been just Facebook exchanges, liking and following and
Right.
tweeting
Yeah.
and things like that. Well, it's nice to meet you, Kris. Thanks for joining me. I really appreciate having you on the podcast.
Nice to meet you too.
So, that being said, tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? What do you do? What are you about? What are we going to learn about today?
Oh man, should I start with what I do now, or should I start with where I came from? I probably should just say what I do now. So I'm a videographer. So I shoot and edit commercials right now. But
That's cool.
graduated with my master's degree in film about a year or so ago. Made a couple of short films. So
That's cool.
yeah, I do that, and I make YouTube videos on the side. So sometimes I make comedy style videos, and sometimes I make cinema history, educational videos, kind of whatever. So that's kind of what I do in my free time.
Very cool. Do you do anything on like TikTok or short form stuff?
I do, not very consistently, but I've made a couple of things. I avoided TikTok for a long time, but then I did a couple things that that kind of took off because TikTok's algorithm is very kind.
Yes.
And that will like give you the bug, like that will inspire you to do more. So I've done a little bit, but not a whole lot.
Yeah, TikTok's great at like the newbie games.
Brand.
Right.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
I've only really tried to like have a brand on YouTube. I don't really have much of a like TikTok or Instagram brand, but
yeah. Well, very cool. So you grew up Baptist, right, in Arkansas, just like me. And then were your parents were they evangelical Baptist, or were they more non-denominational Baptist? Or what was the kind of the vibe you grew up with?
My parents were pretty chill. I think church was just more something that we just kind of did. I think my mom has always been more of a churchgoer than my dad ever has been. I think they're just more, conservative by sort of like nature, I guess.
Yeah.
But when I was a kid, my mom would take me to the like large Baptist church in Crosset in our hometown. It's like the biggest like church in the town.
Wow, so
and I hated it. Yeah, I hated it. It was really boring. Everything was very uptight, and I really couldn't wait to just leave and go home and like watch the movies that I had rented from the video store that day. Yeah. So it's just it's just very uptight and made me feel uncomfortable, and I have like an uncomfortable feeling and uncomfortableness towards institutions. and tucking my shirt in and all that kind of stuff. So we did that but for most of my childhood, and I really just kind of like was going through the motions with it. And then when I was like probably about 12 or 13, my mom started going to a smaller Baptist church, where actually the youth pastor from the big church, he left because he wanted to like make a Christian like rock band, and the big church was like, what? No, that's awesome. Not happening. Yeah, he was like 30, and he like started his own church, like a smaller kind of church, and hired a youth pastor who was like 23, And so we started going there, and I like was like, oh, these guys are actually like kind of cool. And
Yeah.
so they like, the youth pastor like took me under his wing, and I thought he was the coolest. And they were much more relaxed, and we play
Yeah.
Xbox together. And looking back, it's very strange that you can be a 23-year-old, and because your profession is youth pastor, that you can just like take a group of teenagers on trips with you, and no
Yeah.
parents will mind at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like
Um,
that, and also in the church, I feel like, at least in the Baptist church, no matter how young you are, if you're married, you suddenly get to, like, tell everybody else how to live their life. Like, the same 19-year-olds that were 19 a month ago, as married 19-year-olds get to, like,
right.
lead the service and tell you about marriage and stuff like that.
Yes. Yes. It's weird how much they like value marriage and that experience. And there really is like, I guess we can go into it a little bit, but I found that, particularly odd in my 20s, because I didn't get married until my 30s. But
Mm.
whenever I would like try to go back to church, in my 20s, occasionally it would be very much of this awkward thing of like, oh, there's no one really like me here. And they don't really like
Yeah.
care about, trying to cater to me. So,
Yeah, yeah. I felt that exact same thing. I felt like I was definitely being, like, sized up for marriage every time I went to, like, the college age church groups,
mhm,
and I was not measuring up. Like, I was being sized up for marriage and discarded, like, "Nope, not this one.
mhm,
She's a little too weird." Um,
yep.
Interesting, and so when you were kind of on your own, did you or how old were you, I guess, when you started to kind of feel like Christianity wasn't necessarily what you believed or what you wanted to continue following?
I mean, it was definitely later. I mean, I went to youth group for most of high school and got really, really into it.
Yeah.
I think I found a sense of community there. I found a
Yeah,
sense of belonging
totally.
there. And when you're
Yeah.
13, you're also starting to have feelings of like, what does it all mean? There's got to be more to life.
This isn't a
Um,
thing, mom.
I remember I went on a mission trip to Mexico when I was 13, and we did pretty much nothing. We just made ice cream for one day for some kids. But when I came back, I felt like so much more mature. I felt like I had experienced the world and had this like deeper, like philosophical insight into everything. Um,
Yes.
I think it's partly because I found that community and had some sort of purpose, that really
Yeah.
kept me in it throughout my teenage and college years. Because I think if things had been just slightly different when I went to college, if I hadn't found that like you know a big community, who knows what would have happened. But I think
Yeah.
that sort of feeling of belonging kind of keeps you in it, for a while. So it really
Yeah,
wasn't until
yeah.
after college that I started to like feel disconnected from it.
Do you remember anything in particular that made you feel that way, or was it just kind of an amalgamation of stuff over time?
It was very, very slow. I make the joke that I've been deconstructing since I constructed, or that I've been deconstructing since, because
That's
I
so real,
always
though.
like I've always had that rebellion attitude, or that feeling of wanting to non-conform.
Yeah.
I think Christianity can be that way when you're like
Mhm.
non-conforming to the world. And I
Yeah.
was really into Christian rock when I was a teenager. Like
Like
I would go to
like
shows
who?
all the time. I mean,
Really? There were
everybody,
that
like,
many shows to go to?
oh my gosh, you have no idea.
I
There's
don't.
a
That's
whole there was
wild.
a whole there was a whole subculture. I mean, um Under Oath, Reliant K, Classic Crime,
Lion K,
Following
yes,
Up,
yes.
Thousand Foot
Yep.
Crutch. I mean, yeah, there was like this. I've kind of wanted to like actually try to look into the possibilities of a documentary on it around this time, because I definitely feel like there was a time where there were all these smaller indie bands who could sort of like make a somewhat of a living, being like this really niche, like we're gonna appeal to these like Christian punk kids and
Yeah.
like have a place for it. And I don't know if that exists at all, mostly because of the music industry, but I don't know where that is at all.
Wild.
But it definitely
Yeah.
seemed like it was like a blip in time, and that I was the right age for it at the time.
Yeah, like you just happened to be in like the perfect spot on the timeline of Earth to like run into that
Yeah,
era. Yeah.
right. And they would always come to Arkansas. Now nobody comes to Arkansas. Although it's starting to get a little bit better, I think. But
I feel like everybody
yeah.
goes to Northwest Arkansas and then claims they've been to Arkansas, and
Yeah.
it's not quite the same.
Right. But yeah, I've always had that sort of like feeling of wanting to go against the grain. And even throughout college, even though I found that community, I always felt like I was a little bit of an outsider into certain things. And I think it just sort of
Yeah.
like snowballed throughout college. Like we had a pastor who was very sort of anti-media and very like just not really understanding of art. And that's I
Which is
think
like the opposite of what you needed.
yeah, I mean I think that's a fundamental problem in American Christianity is a resistance to art appreciation or definitely a resistance to secular art of any kind.
Yes, absolutely.
Which is why you have to make 100 different Christian bands to appeal to, everybody.
Yes.
In fact, you know what? If I think we could play a game where if you named a band, I could probably find a Christian band that correlated. Because there used to be like brochures that were like, if you like Linkin Park, you should check out Thousand Foot Crutch and blah 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 blah. Blah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh man, yeah. Who do you think would be like? Trying to think. Who do you think would be like the Avril Lavigne of Christian music? Was there such a
Crystal
thing?
Myers.
Wow, you're not kidding. Wow.
I almost thought I don't know why, but for some reason I thought you were going to say Avril Lavigne, and that's the first thing that popped into my head. Yeah,
that's
there was
funny.
a girl named Crystal Myers, and I remember even at the time we thought we were like, oh yeah, she's like the Christian Avril Lavigne. She had like the same sort of flag attitude.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because when you asked me that, the first band that came to mind was a Christian band. So I was like, wait, I have to go through my Rolodex. It was like hard for me to remember a band I listened to at the time that wasn't a Christian band. Like I was thinking Newsboys, their Thrive album. Oh yeah. They're already Christian. So interesting. That should be a party trick.
Yeah.
You should get people to like give you money on the street if you can like tell them. That'd be awesome.
That would be the weirdest party trick ever. Yeah, but yeah, I could definitely do that.
It would be for like a niche crowd, but it would kill it.
Yeah, I actually started listening to a podcast of some guys who are doing deep dives into like Christian artists from the 90s and 2000s, and it's been a lot of fun to like sort of like revisit that. It's called Church Jams Now.
I was literally about to recommend them to you. So I went to high school.
No way.
Yeah, I've been on their podcast before. Yeah, I was literally gonna tell you. Yeah, I was literally gonna tell you after this. I was like, you should check out Church Jams Now. Yeah, you should. Everybody listening, check out Church Jams Now if you haven't. Yeah, I did the Newsboys album on their podcast like a year and a half ago.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to go and listen to that episode because I haven't gotten to that one yet.
Yeah, that's awesome. If you're ever interested, I can connect you with them if you're ever interested in like being on it.
I've already been talking to him on Twitter. I don't know what you're talking about.
Really? That's hilarious. That's what a small world. Yeah. He's from Arkansas. He's from Bentonville.
Yeah. That's what we were talking about. That's funny because I listened to their episode on talking about The Wedding because that was a band that was from Arkansas that I was really into. But yeah.
That's funny. Small world. Small world.
Anyway, I feel like anybody who's listening. A couple of different rabbit holes.
Yeah. So by the time you were like in college, would you say that you were still into being a Christian, or were you kind of like questioning things at that point?
Yeah, I definitely questioned things, and I definitely had a period where I went through like kind of a rough breakup, and that sort of culminated with me just getting fed up with my own feelings of feeling fake. I started to feel like I was really going through the motions. I was like leading a Bible study, and I just like felt like I didn't really even believe what I was trying to teach people. I was telling people that they should read their Bible, and I really wasn't finding any growth in that anymore. So I started really, becoming more interested in film, and like I said, our pastor was just not into that, and that sort of like really rubbed me the wrong way, and I definitely was growing probably more liberal in my thinking, and it's so interesting. I wouldn't say I was like uber conservative, but I think a lot of times, especially teenagers, they don't really know what they are. You know, they
Right.
think this certain way because everyone around them thinks this way. You know, when I was in
Yes.
high school, I thought that homosexuality was a sin, you know, and that you know, people who did that were just wrong, and that you know, that
Yeah.
we shouldn't allow our nation to become like that. And I didn't
Yeah.
know any different. I didn't know any gay people, so I didn't have that sort of
Right.
sense of empathy in my life. So
Yeah.
you know, when you start going through I think that kind of experience, um, you know, I was, you know, started to feel disconnected with it. It's interesting also how many conservatives attend liberal colleges.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
it's
100%.
like it's obvious they're not really like taking to their courses, and it's like, why are you here? Like,
Yeah,
what are you
what are you
getting out of
doing?
this?
Yeah, I feel like there's 2
Yeah.
types of conservative people who do that. People who have been secretly liberal for a while, and they just kind of, "Oh, I'm just going there for my degree. Ugh, all these liberals. Ugh," when really they're
Hmm.
kind of into that idea.
Right.
Or the people, like you said, who you're like, "Why are you here? Like, how did you end up here? What's going on?" Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Although I
like
feel
so
like
many
with
people I
Monticello.
know. No, sorry, I was gonna say so many people I knew just like did not like their classes and did not
Yeah.
like learning things, and it's like, what? Why are you here? I don't understand.
Why? Oh, you don't like learning things, you say? You have an awful lot of classes for someone who hates learning things. That's hilarious. And do you think
Yeah,
if you had gone to a church that was more open to music and film and things like that, do you think maybe you would have been Christian longer?
I mean, maybe. I mean, I'm spoiling things a little bit, but I still sort of like default to Christian,
Yeah.
at least in sort of my, I don't know, worldview or whatever. But we can talk about that a little bit more. But um, I definitely think it would have kept me going to a church. I mean,
Yeah.
I even went when I went to LA. I thought that maybe I would, when I moved out to Los Angeles. I thought maybe like, oh, I'll find like a church that is more in line with my thinking and has like, you know, like more accepting, and you know, like can challenge me in some way.
Yeah.
And it didn't really happen. I've like had some Christian friends that were, you know, cool, and I hung out with and were interesting, but I
Yeah.
definitely didn't feel like I, you know, got back to where I was
Yeah.
to be zealous. So I think I had to come to the terms with, I think I'm still technically a Christian, but I'm not an evangelical. I don't
Yeah.
really consider myself what most people would consider American Christianity. So I think I
Yeah.
just had to like, took me a long time to just really sift through all that stuff and to figure out like, yeah, this is really what I think what I've grown up in as American Christian has really become this sort of thing that is so separate from what I actually feel and what I actually want to look like or what I want
Yeah.
to be like.
Yeah, and honestly, I would say that like Southern Christianity is its own thing. Like you can be a Christian in
For
the
sure.
South, and if you go to a church that is the same exact denomination you went to in the South, in the North, it's going to be a totally different experience. It's kind of like football in the South versus football in the North. You know, down here it's like
Mm,
ride or die. Up there it's like it's cool. It's all right. The Super Bowl's
yeah.
nice. So I think just transitioning from Southern Christian to anything else is its own deconstruction journey, even if you're still a Christian and you still believe in God and follow Jesus and stuff like that. It's just like a whole different culture.
Yeah. Honestly, I was surprised at how much I didn't think it was that different when I went out to LA.
Really?
And I think
Really?
it's because, yeah, and I think it's because I had, you know, like decided in my mind, oh, these are the things I don't like. These are the things that I don't want to be a part of. And then when I went to a church, it's kind of like, I mean, yes, technically it's different, but there's still this like cliquish attitude. There's still this sort of like, we are in this place, we must behave. Now let's
Yeah.
sing these sort of like very lukewarm water, very like boring songs, and listen to this guy who's, I guess he technically has a degree in seminary or whatever. He doesn't seem like super intelligent, but he's going to talk to us for half an hour about how we should, you know, love our wives and children, even though I don't have those things.
Yeah.
And you know,
He's married, so he
uh,
knows a lot of stuff.
Right, yeah, and he's only 25. That's younger than me. And so yeah, I think it was still sort of like, oh, I thought it was about this, but it's actually something deeper. I think it's something that's like really sort of like built into the model of how we've decided that Christianity should be. And it's really, for me, I think a consumerist, capitalist, model, that has
Yeah.
really sort of just, rubbed me the wrong way. But I
Yeah,
probably live in the wrong
absolutely.
country for.
Well, yeah, I mean, wasn't it Jesus who, like, flipped the tables in the church when he caught them, selling things and trying to make money in the church? So,
Yeah,
consumerism
I mean,
should not be a
that's
part of
sort
it.
of I mean, that's like the basis for, I think, Jesus's entire ministry, which is just um, questioning and challenging the status quo, and challenging uh, how people are doing their religion. Like, and he challenged it so much that they killed him for it. And it's kind of like a almost like sort of like feeling like, I think it's weird that I kind of felt this way, because it almost made me feel closer to that
Interesting.
than it did sort of build a wedge against it.
Interesting. It's almost like you felt closer to his teachings because you felt ostracized than being welcomed, and, like, feeling super comfortable would have made you feel. That's super
Yeah,
interesting.
definitely in a way. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I
So
and I thank goodness for like podcasts and and stuff like that, because that's how I sort of like found alternatives to this type of thing, and like other
yeah,
philosophers and teachers and things. There's a podcast. Do you know You Made It Weird with Pete Holmes?
I've heard of it. I haven't listened to it, but I've
Okay.
heard it's really good.
Yeah, so he's a comedian, and he's got like a
Okay.
Christian background. So he will sometimes invite like philosophers or Christian thinkers or stuff like that onto his podcast. There's one from like 2014, so it's like super old, where he brought on this guy named Peter Rollins,
Mhm.
who's like a quasi-Christian philosopher, thinker, writer. And I've kept that podcast downloaded on my phone for like 9 years. And I've
Wow,
listened to
that's
it at
cool.
least once, and I've listened to it at least once a year.
That's
Um,
awesome.
it was really like kind of like mind blowing for me. And he talks a lot about sort of like the rejection of the American pursuit of happiness, and how that's actually like the fundamentals of Christianity is rejecting that sort of like pursuit of happiness. That they're embracing your lack. Embracing the sort of like the idea that life is shit, and that you can't make yourself happy. There is no like magic formula. There is no like quick fix or thing in this world that will satisfy us. That we sort of
Yeah.
like embracing that and being sort of omnipresent, which he notes that Jesus was, a, a very omnipresent, or not omnipresent, but a very like present person in his
Yeah.
teaching, and that kind of thing. So
Yeah. And so what is it about Christianity that keeps you involved?
that's the $1,000,000 question, isn't it?
Isn't it though? Isn't it? Hmm.
Uh, yeah, I know. Sometimes maybe I think it's just how I'm wired. Like sometimes I think it's
Familiarity.
how I'm. Yeah, what was that?
Familiarity kind of.
Maybe a familiarity. Maybe it's that I'm just more of a sort of like mystically, spiritually inclined type of person. Maybe it's that I lean towards a hopeful sort of mindset, inclination. I don't know. Because I think if I was, obviously, if I was raised in another country, I definitely would probably be something else.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think there's also just the idea of what still draws me to this sort of like the narrative, I guess, of Jesus, or this belief system. It's not really like about what you sort of believe, but it's more about how you are, or how you a way of being in the world almost. I mean, there's like a few Christians who I think have inspired me. Obviously, like Martin Luther King. Fred Rogers is another one that like always comes to mind whenever I think about like who are the ones who've done this right, or at least the way that
Yeah.
I think it should be done. And it's more, I think, a way of just like embracing your finitude, or embracing that this idea that we can escape our lack and that we should embrace the here and now, and how do we try to like you know, how do we sort of like make peace with our neighbor, you know? Like I think that's
Yeah.
like the core message that I've always sort of like leaned against too, is how do I love, how do I find love for my neighbor, how do I find love for my enemy?
Yeah.
Those are sort of the core things that I think have always just kind of struck with me, and have never really, because the sort of, I guess, the the modern argument of literalism has never bothered me. I've never really struggled with that. I mean, I have definitely like changed the way I think about it, you know, to where
Yeah.
I definitely see the Bible differently now. I definitely, you know, have a different feelings about a lot of it, but it's never been a case of when, you know, I use this analogy of like, if you were to take someone who, you know, had never seen a movie before, and then you showed them like Star Wars, you know, at the end of the movie, you'd be like, "What'd you think of the movie?" And they'd be like, "Oh, I loved it. I mean, that was so powerful. That story of Luke and his father and Darth Vader and all that stuff, Force." And then that person would go, "Well, you know, it's all fake, right? It's not real.
Yeah.
Didn't happen. You know, it's not really Luke Skywalker's doesn't exist. You know, it's Mark Hamill or whatever." That person
Wait,
probably
what?
wouldn't be like, "Oh." That person would probably be like, I mean, they probably would not be like, "Oh, well then I hate it. It sucked.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm never gonna think about that again." You know, it wouldn't really matter to them because they enjoyed the movie. You know, it meant something to them in the time at the time, and maybe they took something from it. So,
Mhm.
you know, the arguments, I guess, of whether or not like, well, do you believe this is this real? It's like I don't know if it's really happened, but is it true? Yeah, I think it's true for me. I think it's
Yeah.
something about it at least resonates as true for me.
Yeah, and you know, Aesop's fables weren't true, but that doesn't mean the message behind them isn't a good message,
Right.
you know, like the tortoise and the hare, things like that. I mean, you know, human beings, that's how we first communicated, was storytelling, making up stories
Yeah.
about mythical beings to teach a lesson. So I've always thought that the majority of the Bible was supposed to be metaphors, you know, like was supposed to be like, I don't think Jonah was actually swallowed by a whale, but I get that there's a message there, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah. It's kind of interesting to me that people don't read it that way. I mean, on both sides, you know, you have like fundamentalists who think that we should take everything as literal,
Like
and it's
Jonah
like,
was swallowed by a
are
whale. That's what
you
happened.
it's like there was a talking snake and it was real, and I'm just like, I mean, okay, if that's really important to you, okay. um and then the other people who are like, talking snake, that's just ridiculous, why even pay attention to that? It's like,
Yes.
I mean, i, I don't think like you said, Aesop's fables really happened, but I think there's lessons and things that we can glean of truth from that, you know, like
Yeah. Yeah.
similar
What cracks
similar
me
type
up
of
are the people
situation.
who do both. The people who are like,
Hmm.
yes, the Bible is real, 100%, everything is fact. And you're like, oh, what about, I don't know, like Zeus and Hercules? And they're like, that is ridiculous. A man who lives in the sky and has anger problems and has a son that lives on earth, ridiculous. And you're like,
Right.
you're
And
so
it's probably
close.
demonic. And it's
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
demonic, like
exactly.
that Harry
It's
Potter.
of Satan. It is of Satan, just like Harry Potter. Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So so you don't consider yourself at all an atheist or an agnostic. You're just a spiritual individual who doesn't necessarily align with Baptist or Methodist or something like that.
Yeah. I've called myself different things depending on how I
Yeah.
feel that day. I think I
Yep.
wrote Christian humanist
Yeah.
in
Yep.
your brief. Um
Yep.
I for a while I would consider I found someone who coined the term Christian anarchist, which basically just
There you
meant
go.
like that they consider themselves Christian going against American Christianity, which I thought was interesting. So for a while I was like, I'm a
That's
Christian
interesting.
anarchist,
That is.
but nobody knows what that means. So it's not helpful to just tell people that. Um,
It's not rebellious if nobody
so
knows what it means. And so
exactly. There was
so
this
is
a
your
tangent. There was a
go for
sorry
it.
tangent because
Yeah.
that it's not rebellious if nobody knows what it means. The only tattoo I've almost gotten in my life was this band tattoo that was like the, you know, the symbol for music, but it had like a cross over it, like it was the circle and the cross over it, like it was like, and it had some like philosophical, like rebellious message to it, you know. But nobody knows what that means. Nobody knows that band. And so it definitely became a thing of like, I don't have to explain this to people every time they ask me what my tattoo is.
Yes.
So yeah. No, thank
That's
you.
hilarious. That's a great reason to not get a tattoo though, because man, sometimes I just don't want to talk to people. Sometimes I just don't want to explain
Right, yeah.
things.
You
I feel
have to
that.
realize you are going to have to talk about that tattoo for the rest of your life.
The rest of your
So
life. One of
you
these
better
days,
be
they'll
ready.
hopefully invent like a whiteboard tattoo where you can just like change what it is all the time, just based on what you're feeling. You never have to regret it. I don't know. Maybe one
I
day.
mean, you can do that with Sharpie.
So you turns out the whiteboard tattoo has existed for a very long time and it's available at Walmart for like $1.99.
Just don't do
It's
it
just a
all the time
Sharpie.
because you can poison yourself that way, I think.
That's true. And it would just stain for a while. Like you'd have to, yeah, you'd have to switch sides or something. I could see
Hmm.
that. That's funny.
But yeah, it is interesting how like that desire for, I think, community can sometimes just like become a blindfold to us if we
Absolutely.
selective blindfold if we want to. But yeah, I'd like to
Absolutely.
say that, you know, I'm in a place right now where like I found that sort of community and I'm thriving in it. I don't think that's really true. I'm definitely still trying to like figure out how that is and where I belong in that area. So
I think that has less to do with religion and more to do with just being adults in our 30s. It's just impossible to make friends.
yeah, I think
Yeah.
it's a little bit of both for sure.
Yeah. Like we could
Yeah,
be
I
the
mean, I
most
definitely.
devout Christians or just straight up just it's like anarchist atheists and like either way we'd be lonely
Mhm.
probably. Just because
Yeah,
we're in our
I think
30s.
so. It definitely would be a lot more easier to be like a Southern conservative because I noticed there's a lot of them, and
Yeah.
they usually hang out in groups.
That's they hang out in flocks. They do
Yeah,
things together like yell and
they
and
go to
rally.
sporting events and
They
yell even
do.
more.
They
Yeah,
do. They form
they
parasocial
go see.
relationships with athletes.
Yes, or
That's
Taylor
about it, I
Swift.
think. Or Taylor Swift. Or Taylor Swift. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Um, so do you think there would ever be a time in your life where you if you found community elsewhere outside of the church, do you ever think that would be a time in your life where you no longer needed the church? Or do you think you would still be a spiritual person, just also have an external friend group?
Well, I mean, I think the church is a lot bigger than just people who meet in a building on Sundays. So,
Yeah.
you know, I've had friend groups that were Christian. I've had friend groups that are not Christian.
Yeah.
Um, and I still sort of consider that a layer of church. I definitely have found um, meaning and purpose in groups of non-Christians, and I've found different feelings of belonging and purpose in groups that are Christian. And I haven't really felt that need of a place where I can wake up and go every Sunday morning to hear someone talk. Um, so yeah, I don't know. That's interesting. I don't think there's anything that would really like change my core sort of like value or systems.
Yeah.
But I think it's just more of like trying to figure out what that means. You know, I don't know if I've fully like understood or I don't think I've fully sort of like learned what is really the difference between what America has deemed as the church and what sort of like a real church is supposed to be like, or what even the purpose of church is supposed to be. So that was
Yeah.
a very muddy answer, but
No, no, I understand what you're saying for sure. I think that's something that people who have deconstructed in any way, because a lot of people think that deconstruction means that you become an atheist, but I think it means, and what I've
yeah.
read it to mean is from whatever belief system you had before, you are now changing to a belief system that aligns more with what it is that you want to live by. And you can be a Christian and deconstruct from one type of Christianity to another, one denomination to another.
Yeah.
When you talk about churches that make you mad, when you were like, yeah, that makes me mad, you know, the church we visit, what's the type of thing that makes you mad that they do or say?
I mean, I don't think it's really anything super specific. I think it's more just a level of shallowness. It's what I feel is a lack of authenticity, or at least
Yeah.
a lack of willingness to go to complex or tough places. Whenever I basically feel like I've heard the same sort of like catchphrases over and over again, that's when I just start to my mind just starts to roll, my eyes just start to roll back.
Yeah.
I oh, I had a point I was gonna make. Oh, what was it? Oh,
You were saying how like it's not necessarily a particular thing that sets you off or makes you mad. It's more just kind of the
Oh,
blanket
yes.
vibe.
Okay, so I remember having a discussion with my youth pastor after when I was in college and I went back home and visited him, and he talked about how, you know, he realized at a certain point that the church that he pastored, he had become the pastor at this point, but he realized that basically the people who attended his church, they just wanted to come to church, hear a moving sermon, and then go home, eat McDonald's, and watch football. Basically,
Go yell at a
he
barista
was,
for being out of pumpkin spice.
yeah, basically what I felt like he was saying, like that his church was dumb, and that it felt like a very sort of like it felt like a lack of respect for his congregation. In other words, was what I got from that. It felt like a very sort of like shallowness, or a lack of a willingness to go deeper, or to challenge himself, or to challenge anybody. But most people, I think, in that sort of position have, you know, found a niche and sort of hold on to it. And there are so many, I think, pastors who don't have room for doubt, or don't have room for changing any part of their belief systems, because if they did, they'd probably get fired, or their congregation would throw them out, because I think that's what a lot of congregations, people who attend church, want, is they just kind of want a very safe sort of, shallow reading of scripture, or shallow reading of whatever, and just kind of
like
take it in, go home, and
like a tick box experience. Like, okay, we
yeah,
did it.
absolutely. Like,
100 Sundays in a row.
Yeah, I got my little 5-hour energy of Jesus for the day, and I'm good.
5-hour energy. No, what it should be is like 72-hour energy. It lasts 3 days. I don't know. I feel like there's a joke there. Yeah, I definitely agree with you. When we were growing up, my mom called us religion whores because we went to like a lot of different churches, and I didn't realize I wasn't allowed to say that. So I would like say that all the time to people, not knowing what like the word whore meant. Anyway,
my mom says we're religion whores.
Literally, that's what I would say. And so I feel like there were definitely churches where it was like, hello, you are here to get your church credits for this week. God is glad that you are here. Here's a sermon about lying being bad and how God wants us to treat people. Here's a song. Come on, worship band. And then everybody leaves, maybe there's a potluck afterward. And then there's some churches that are like, we're Christians, but we're cool. And then it's all like performative. And then there's other ones where it's like, yeah, we actually are here to worship and learn and do things. Yeah.
I think a big, like, appeal of the sort of mega churches that have taken over the country, in the last like 20 or so years, is that sort of like idea that you can sort of be invisible. You can sort of just slide in and not really have to I don't have to actually meet the pastor. I don't have to actually like have any sort of like thing that will challenge me, or like anything that will sort of like make me feel uncomfortable in any sort of way. And you know, I'm not saying that if you go to a church and you feel uncomfortable, there might be a good reason for it. Maybe you should leave, but,
Yeah,
but you
yeah.
know,
Yeah, it freaks me out when I found out, or I should say it freaked me out when I found out how many people know their pastor. Like, I was an
yeah.
adult when I learned that some people grew up, like, on first name basis with their pastor. That's news to me. I had no idea. Like, I didn't know you were supposed to talk to that
Yeah.
dude. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's just very interesting. Like, especially in Tennessee, there are several jobs, which I'm pretty sure this is illegal. Maybe not. Maybe it's a state's decision. There's a lot of jobs here that require a pastoral reference. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
have y'all have met your pastor enough times he would write you a letter of reference? Like, that's just wild to me. I don't know. That's
Yeah.
just that idea. I guess I was always that kid who like wanted to just get out of there as fast as I could. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
I
Not
definitely was
sure.
too. And that's, you know, I think that's what attracted my mom to when we started going to the smaller church when I was in high school. What attracted her was that the pastor would come over to our house like multiple times just to see how we were doing. At one point, he
Really?
bought me an Xbox. So I called
What?
because I called him to ask him if I could mow his lawn because I wanted to mow lawns to save up to buy an Xbox. And so I called him and was like, "Hey, can I mow your lawn this summer? Because I'm trying to save up to buy an Xbox." And he was like, "Sure." And then like 2 days later, he brought me an Xbox.
And did you like
Yeah,
mow his lawn the rest of the summer, or did you just like
I
never
did.
text him back? You
I
just
did.
ghosted. You just
He
went to
didn't. He didn't
college.
say I had. He didn't say I had. But my parents definitely said you have to mow
Go
his
over
lawn.
there. You mow that man's lawn. Wow, that's
Yeah.
it. Now, is that the same? Is that like the pastor that left the church to start his own church, or was that somebody totally different?
Yes, that's the pastor who left the big Baptist church to start his own. Yeah.
Interesting. Have you talked to
Hmm.
him in the last couple decades?
No, he moved to Texas. I think when I was probably like 18 or 19. But
Got it.
other than buying me the Xbox, I was not super close with him.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, that's good. That's good. Probably.
And then my youth pastor I was much more close to during like when I was a high schooler, and it was really during college when I started to go back and visit, and I had conversations with him like that uncomfortable one I was telling you about how he felt about his congregation, and also
Yeah,
questions about and also you know bringing up questions about homosexuality and um, different stuff like that, and kind of
yeah,
getting his sort of because I was also like really dipping my toes into being a pacifist, you know, like and feeling like Christianity should be passive should have an element of pacifism to it.
that's a hard word.
Because
I
if
can't.
Jesus is really telling us to turn the other Jesus is telling us to turn the other cheek, you know, then I think we should. I don't think we should be bombing Iraq and things like that. And I'm questioning George Bush. This is that era, just to give you an idea.
Yeah.
You know, and feeling and hearing his sort of viewpoints on that was kind of like disturbing. Definitely more of a fundamentalist kind of idea, like of I don't know about exactly if he thought we should bomb Iraq or not, but I remember just trying to talk to him about like radical love in the form of like pacifism,
Yeah.
and he
Yep.
was being like, Kris, if someone were to like break in your house in the middle of the night and was like had a gun to your mother's head or whatever, what would you do? And I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, why is there a gun to my mother's head? What are you talking
Yeah.
about? This
Yeah.
isn't about like what you would do in extreme situations. This is about what
Yeah.
we should be like, you know, like going towards, because, you know, I think there was like, you know, an argument about guns in there somewhere, you know.
Nowadays, do you find yourself more drawn towards like kind of like a secular Christian life where you don't necessarily go to church all the time, but you still consider yourself a Christian? Or are you still actively in the pursuit of a church to go to as often as possible?
I mean, we definitely we attend church occasionally. We've been going to a church with just two of our friends here in our hometown. And I'm definitely like not like anti-church, but I don't think
Yeah.
it's something I don't think it's something that I have to do to, you know, to continue being a Christian or to continue practicing my faith, which I feel is very personal to me.
Yeah.
So it's not something that I feel like I have to do, but it's still something I, feel like I am still like wanting to try to figure out how to do.
Yeah. And if you had to pick like one or two things that are your favorite things about being a Christian, and maybe one or two things that you're just like, this is the downside of being a Christian, what would you say?
I'm trying to think of any upsides. I'm
I
not
didn't
sure
say it.
Jesus would
I
give
didn't
you.
say it.
I'm not sure Jesus would give you any upsides either, honestly.
Jesus is like, did you miss that part where they literally killed me on a cross and then buried me? Shit
Yeah.
sucks.
Yeah. Like, hey, you should give up all your money and give it to the poor. What's the upside of that? I mean, there isn't one for you. you you know, you'll be
Maybe
giving up all your stuff to give to the poor.
yeah,
Um
then you'll be poor, and then maybe somebody will give you money. Maybe. You hope.
yeah. I mean, I definitely, one of my best friends who is a Christian, I feel like he's someone that it's definitely nice to have people who, if you are going through something, to sort of talk about something with, and that even, he'll pray for me, or, like just that sort of like, like little thing of being like, um, you know, maybe we should pray about this, or, that kind of thing. I think
Mhm.
it feels like if nothing else, it feels like a one small step beyond, um, oh yeah, that sucks, man. It's definitely sort of like, it definitely like feels more intentional. And I'm not trying to belittle people
No.
who tell
Mm-mm.
me who would rather just say like, oh yeah, you're in my thoughts or whatever like that. But um there definitely is like some, I think, intentionality behind it, that I
Mhm.
think is a good thing, that I think is um something that sort of gives me a little bit of, I don't know, I don't know. It gives me a little bit of something, I guess. Um, and then the negative side. What's the, what did you say? How did you word your question?
I was just saying, like, a couple things that you enjoy about being a Christian, and then just a couple things that you don't enjoy about being a Christian.
Um, well, I don't
Like
enjoy that most
downside.
churches meet Sunday mornings. I'd rather they not do
Yeah.
that.
What's up with that?
Because I don't want to go Sunday morning. Um, um, I think also just I've had a few conversations with some of my friends, particularly from LA, about like growing up Christian and what that and where I am now. And it's kind of hard for you to in a very short amount of time let them know that even though you still consider yourself Christian, you're not a weird conservative who's gonna who's gonna be weird and try to get them to come to church or anything. So I think there is always that sort of like, for a while I would definitely not tell people I was a Christian because I did not want that sort of like, I didn't want that stank. I didn't, I did I didn't want them. I remember when I was in college, I made a friend at work who was not a Christian, and I told her that I was, and she said, she was like, on a scale of 1 to Jesus camp, how Christian are you?
On
And
a
I
on
was
a
like, I don't
scale
know
of
how
like
to answer that
1
question.
on a scale of like
Yeah.
1 to like 12 kids. On a scale of like 1 to like Trump,
Right.
how Christian are you? That's
Yeah,
funny. And now
you want to stay away from all of those stereotypes as far as you can, which is hard.
yeah, yeah, I remember when I was in college and I would make some comment about the people that I hung out with, and other people would go, "Oh, so you're a Christian." And I remember being like, "What's that about?" Like, ugh. But now I get it. Now I get it. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Okay, I see. I see what they were talking about." It's unfortunate, but I
Mhm.
see what they were talking about. Now, you mentioned in your, like, early youth and college, there was a group that you described as, like, nearly cult-like. What was it about that group that kind of gave you cult vibes a little bit?
Well, I mean, I think it's sort of like is what I was talking about with, when you're especially youth ministry and college ministry is pretty unique in that it's like sort of half adult ministry. It's got one foot in adult ministry, but one foot in youth ministry. So it's like
Yeah.
you're not a child anymore. You're technically an adult, but you're not really an adult. You don't have like those adult responsibilities. You have a lot of free time, so you have a lot of free time to devote yourself to the cause, um,
Yeah.
to the war on God or whatever. Um, so I think that that sort of mindset can sometimes breed this sort of behavior. It was just very like um, cliquish, but in a very sort of religious way.
Yeah.
Um, and that's really what sort of like made me want to phase out. Like I'm slowly fading out of this background. Oh, I'm surprised I'm still in it.
I was
Oh,
gonna say, you're
oh,
staying pretty good, actually.
all right, all right, all
You
right.
are
Well,
giving me,
anyway.
you're giving me a Bart not Bart, Homer Simpson
Oh,
disappearing
Homer
into the
Simpson,
bush
yeah,
vibes.
fading into the
Yeah.
bushes. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
basically what I did the last 2 years of college, slowly.
Yeah.
I remember at one point we had like a special night where it was like a long service or whatever, and I think the pastor was kind of going on his sort of like anti-media sort of kicks or whatever, and then they ended up I don't think they did this officially, but some people decided to get together and have a sort of like media burning or media destroying where they
Yeah, I
like
know a
got
group
rid
of people
of
who did that too.
yeah, or they got rid of
Huh.
like some people burned their Harry Potter books, and and other things that were causing them to stumble or whatever. And that's definitely
Interesting.
like I remember that between one of me and my best friends at the time who was also in it, we're kind of like, yeah, we don't want to be a part of it. We don't want to
Yeah,
be
no.
any part of
At the
this.
at the point where people start burning literature, I'm like, "You know what? This party isn't as fun as I thought it was gonna be.
Yeah.
It's giving 1935 vibes. It's giving yeah. Uh,
Yeah.
do you believe in heaven and hell? Are those things that you consider real?
Like literally or
I mean, like, when you die, what do you think is gonna happen to you, if you had to
Oh,
guess?
no, that's a bit above my paid grade as some
You're
people
like,
would
"Listen, I
say.
just live here."
Um, I definitely would like to think I definitely would like to think that something. I remember, crying as a little kid because I definitely thought that when people died that it was just like blackness, just whatever. But um, I don't know. I feel like there's I'm not like a super expert on C.S. Lewis, but I feel like there is an analogy that he makes at some point where it's kind of like this afterlife experience where we almost think of an afterlife as a dream or as
Mhm.
like sort of entering this, how that's how we see it portrayed in films and media. We see it sort of see this floaty white thing and it's very dream-like. But he sort of gives the analogy that really the afterlife is waking up, that really this is sort of the dream. And that when we,
Interesting.
go on, whatever, that's when we really sort of wake up and experience things how they actually are. I don't know if it's really like that, but that's sort of like feels like a goodish scenario.
Yeah, yeah. You're
I
like,
mean, I
"Listen,
definitely
what happens
believe
to
in
me."
heaven and hell. I definitely believe in heaven and hell in the sense that we make heaven and we make hell in our own lives, and every decision that we make, gives us a little bit of heaven or a little bit of hell. Um,
Interesting. I've never heard
and
that
I
take
think that's
before.
I really think that's the core of what um, Jesus's message is, and it's about entering the kingdom of God. I don't think it's like when he says enter the kingdom of God, I don't think he's talking about an afterlife. I think he's talking about every decision you make and everything you do really is sort of like are you bringing the kingdom of God into your own life? Are you sort of like making steps towards
Interesting.
being in peace with, you know, your fellow man? Or are you just digging yourself into a deeper pit of hell, essentially? So
Interesting. I've never heard that take before, but I actually really like that though. The idea that if you're a good person, you'll experience probably closer to heaven on earth, more joy, more
Mhm.
happiness if you treat others with respect, if you're kind, if you're giving, and if you're a shitty person, you're probably going to be living in hell on earth. You're not going to have a lot of friends, you're not going to have a lot of things bringing you joy. You're going to be a curmudgeonly old fart by yourself all alone. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's poetic, honestly. That's poetic.
Yeah, I mean that's honestly all I can really speak to, because we don't know what happens in after this is all over. This is all we have. So this is all we know for sure. So this is all I can really speak to as far as like
Yeah.
how to sort of practically, how to put the teachings of Christ into practice, is that we really sort of like make decisions, and how we interact with people and how we love or don't love each other is really, how really what affects us in the end. And really it's sort of like, you know is what either
Yeah.
brings us peace or doesn't bring us peace.
Yeah, absolutely. That was poetic. I really like that. I wish I'd asked you that question earlier because that your answer was I did not expect that. I've never heard that take before, but that honestly that makes, in my opinion, that makes a lot more sense. That interpretation makes a lot more sense than a lot of
Hmm.
what like fundamentalists and evangelicals describe, hell and heaven to be. Fascinating, very interesting. Well, Kris, I want to be respectful of your time because I know that I said I'd keep you for an hour. But if people were interested in checking out any of your work or checking out anything that you've put out there, videos or anything like that, where could they find you? Where can we see your stuff?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube.
Yeah,
YouTube Kris Watches Movies. So my name is spelled with a K. I'm sure it'll be in the thing so you can see how it's
yeah.
spelled.
I'll
But
put it in the description. I couldn't think of the
yeah,
word.
find me on YouTube and subscribe and all that good stuff.
Like, subscribe, donate money.
Like
Do you
and
have a
subscribe.
Patreon?
I don't yet. That's a goal though. I have a list of goals for the channel, and the first one is make consistently, and that's the one I'm working on right now.
Yeah. Oh
'Cause having
yeah.
a full-time job is really hard when you're trying to do things consistently. So,
Absolutely, 100%, 100%. Well, Kris, this has been a really fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed talking to you, and kind of getting to
yeah,
explore
likewise.
this idea of like deconstructing as a Christian, but staying a Christian. And I appreciate your candid nature of describing the ups and downs of Christianity, because I think a lot of people who are former Christians or current Christians, they feel when they're at church like they're supposed to pretend like Christianity is the best thing that's ever happened to them, when in
Oh, yeah.
reality, it can be a very complicated relationship and lifestyle. And it's not all, I literally was about to say it's not all Guns and Roses. I have no idea why I don't listen to Guns and Roses. I have no idea why I was going to say that.
Yeah,
I'm so, but yeah, I really appreciate you being so
yeah.
forward about that. And I think a lot of people will
No,
relate to that.
I would argue if Christianity has brought you nothing but peace and answers and roses, I don't know what you found, but I don't think it's Christianity.
I don't think you're doing it right, man.
I don't think
I
you're
don't know
doing it
what you
right.